All right, this is our agenda for our time today. It'll be fast, but again, the briefing document will allow you more time to digest. So without further ado, I'd like to go to our first agenda item, which is comments by Vice President Gulat from the University of the California Office of the President. Dr. Gulat is the Vice President for Graduate and Undergraduate Affairs, Vice Provost for Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer for the UC system. Her leadership has been instrumental to UC's role in TK-12 education initiatives and to equity and diversity initiatives in education in general. So we are very grateful for her time with us today. Vice President Gulat.
Hey, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share the important work of the California Teacher Education Research and Improvement Network, or CTERIN. Now, CTERIN was established through a multi-campus Research Catalyst Award from the Office of the President of the University of California. And it focuses on one of the most important levers for improving the educational experiences of California's transitional kindergarten through 12th grade students, its teachers. It recognizes that preparing and retaining a talented and diverse K-12 educator workforce is one of the most important things we can do to advance educational equity, and it is uniquely aligned with UC's mission of teaching, research, and service. The network involves the 9 undergraduate UC campuses, their education schools and departments, their undergraduate STEM education programs, including CalTeach, and many more programs that contribute to teacher education and teacher excellence in California. In collaboration with colleagues in the California State University system, with private and independent colleges and universities, with state agencies, with TK-12 schools, and the communities they serve, CTERIN is one of the largest research collaborations on teacher education in the nation. But it's not just about research. It's about innovation and improvement, creating, supporting, and studying these outcomes in order to improve the educational outcomes for children. And the way that this work gets into the hands of those poised to create the needed improvements is through the many resources that CTERIN creates and makes public, and especially through informative briefings such as this one today, which is aimed at providing policymakers and practitioners with critical data. Unfortunately, those of us who are here today on this call know all too well that too many of our school children are not receiving the education they deserve in our current system, and we want to know how our teachers can help change that. CTERIN's work is focused on teacher preparation that serves a diversity of aspiring teachers, teachers who we know can be prepared to better serve an equally splendid diversity of California school children. Its work is guided by an equity and justice framework in service to students, to ensure that the many aspects of our work remain focused on one critical thing: preparing and supporting teachers to provide just and equitable, anti-racist, emotionally supportive, and successful, let's not forget successful, school experiences for all students. Today, we're going to be sharing findings from an endeavor that has taken years to develop, a statewide data system that can follow teachers from their preparation experience into the schools and right to the students they serve. We've learned a lot about the complexities required in forging the way for such a system, which has not been before available in our state. So the research that's been conducted with this data is aimed at supporting our policymakers so that they can determine the best policy supports to solve some of our most dire issues concerning our teaching force. 2 of these issues are the acute teacher shortage and the diversification of our teaching force. Today, you're going to hear about initial data that can inform both problems, and in the very near future, you're going to hear about more. So I'll turn it back over to the CTERIN team to tell you more, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Vice President Gulat, for your comments. So you understand where this effort is coming from. CTERIN is a collaborative effort across the 9 UC California campuses, founded through a grant from the UC Office of the President, as Vice President Gulat mentioned. This collaborative includes partners in our state agencies, in TK-12 education, in our California state universities and private independent universities, as well as many key education stakeholders across California. They've been key partners in shaping our work. We created CTERIN for the express purpose of improving opportunities for California's teachers to become better prepared to serve California's students. CTERIN founders envisioned 4 primary aims for doing this, which is what you see there in the yellow boxes. So aim 1 is what we're talking about today, and that is the effort to develop this statewide data system that can follow teachers from their pre-service programs into the schools and students they serve. The second aim is about conducting the kind of research that our policymakers need in order to make key decisions. And this is where our collaborators are key in shaping this agenda for aim 2. Aim 3 is a deeper dive into the practices of teacher preparation, where our activity is focused on research, teacher educator learning networks, and improvement efforts. And then finally, aim 4 is about better preparation for our teacher educators that come out of UC. In other words, the teachers of teachers. We're engaging UC doctoral scholars in deliberate preparation opportunities so that they go into teacher education, not just as good researchers of the field, but good practitioners with the needed skill in teaching and mentoring and designing programs, to become the kinds of teacher educators that our field needs. In total, we believe that these 4 aims have the potential to make significant impact in educator preparation in California. Next slide, please. Today, as I said, we're sharing the first release of our findings from our aim 1 data system. This will be the first of several releases over the next few months. Next slide, please. As the most recent Getting Down to Facts report tells us, California's efforts to improve and diversify its teaching workforce has been constrained by a lack of research on our teacher preparation and support system. It's partly due to a lack of a unified data system that can allow for large-scale statewide research on pathways into and through the teaching profession. As most of you know, our state's now working on the Cradle to Career data system, which is starting with student level data. CTERIN is working with teacher level data for all teacher preparation programs and pathways for all teachers who earn credentials and permits and begin teaching in California schools. CTERIN's efforts can inform the state's overall efforts to build out Cradle to Career, and it's vital that we're all informing each other so that we can build what's needed for California. This slide also shows key dimensions our data system currently can explore. You can see that in the bullet points. And with that, I will now turn it over to Christine Ong, a research scientist at the UCLA Center for Research Evaluation Standards and Student Teaching, or CREST. CREST has been building the data system and running analyses. Christine.
Thank you. I wanted to provide a quick overview of our methodology to continue the conversation that Tina started. Our data system includes both public and private data sets from the California Department of Education, as well as the California Commission on Teacher Credentials, as well as public data from the National Center for Education Statistics. And we want to thank again our partners, our collaborators at CD and CTC for helping us with this data request. The data system has layers and levels of data, teacher, school, and classroom variables. And currently we have 6 annual years of data, but our hope and plan is to continue adding years of data as they become available. In terms of our analytic approach, we've spent time with the literature reviewing key meta-analyses to understand what are key variables connected with aspects of outcomes like attrition and retention, and identifying those in the data that we have to the extent possible. What we'll be sharing with you today are some of the descriptive statistics that we've generated thus far through the project. And in the future, we plan to share some of the complex statistical models that we're working on, looking at attention and attrition and retention. Okay, next slide. But first, what do we mean by first-time teachers? It's important to understand what our definition is. We've used a series of criteria to identify those in our sample. So for first-time teachers, we're identifying individuals who have a first teaching credential, whether it's a preliminary or intern credential or a permit, and it's issued by the CTC sometime between July of 2012 and June 30th of 2017. So that's our target time period for new teachers entering California schools. In addition, our criteria include that individuals be classified as a teacher of record, that we're able to link student enrollment data, so aggregate demographic information. And we've also double checked that the individuals do not have a clear credential or tenure status. One thing that Tina's mentioned is our interest in understanding individuals' journeys or their licensure route. And on the next slide, I'll pass it back so you can talk a little bit more about that, Tina.
Thanks. I'll jump back in here and explain that the licensure routes that we're focused on here. These are 3 ways aspiring teachers can become the teacher of record. That is, the teacher in charge of their own classroom and students. The first route, which is depicted here as prelim, is the route where candidates enter preparation programs where they're mentored in student teaching classrooms. And they earn a preliminary teaching credential at the end of this before they become the teacher of record. These credential holders are considered fully prepared to begin teaching. The second route, the intern route, is where candidates enter programs. They have some hours of preparation prior to earning their intern credential. And once they earn their intern credential, they may be employed as teacher of record. The preparation program that they are a part of still supports them while they are employed here. But the intern credential means that they are not fully prepared when they begin teaching as teacher of record. The third pathway here, emergency waiver pathway, is designed to fill acute staffing needs, as you saw on the previous slide, where districts apply for these permits or sponsor these permits for candidates to fill positions. Now, there's 2 things that are important to note about this last route here. The first is that there is no teacher preparation required in this route. It's also the route where teachers begin teaching underprepared to teach. The second thing to note is at the end of your year of teaching on emergency permit or waiver, in order to continue in the profession, aspiring teachers must get some preparation to teach in one of the pathways that leads to a preliminary credential. The final thing to note here is that, as you can see, the preliminary and intern routes, the first 2, lead to the first years of teaching, which also includes induction support. California has a 2-tiered system where all candidates earn a preliminary credential, that's the green, and then are supported their first 2 years through an induction program where they're mentored in teaching, and then they earn their clear credential. All right, I'm going to turn it back to you, Christine.
Thank you, Tina. And one thing I do want to make clear is that in our definition of first-time teachers, both in terms of the criteria and the timeline, our approach may differ somewhat from other studies. So the results that we'll be sharing, while similar, may not exactly overlap, and that's important to keep note of. And finally, as I'd mentioned, we spent a lot of time with the literature and meta-analyses to identify or develop a conceptual framework to draw from as we do our work today. We'll be highlighting some of these variables with asterisks, but there's a lot that we can explore and we hope to explore in the future, as well as perhaps questions or ideas that in future iterations we'll be able to capture. So now we're going to turn it over to the preliminary results. I'm going to turn the screen over to my colleagues, Dr. Lee Tsai and Deborah Latorre, for the next part.
Thank you, Christine. So now we're going to provide a general look at the new teachers who met all of the inclusion criteria previously discussed. Next slide, please. And here, this table presents our current sample with data compiled from July of 2012 to June of 2018. These numbers will soon change as we add the recently available 2018 to 2019 data and the soon to be available 2019 through 2020 data from the CTE. It's important to note here that other sources, as Christine referred to, may define first-time teachers slightly differently, and this may result in findings that should be similar, but may not be exactly down to the last digit the same. Next slide, please. Thank you. So on this slide, we're going to start to break the sample down a little bit to understand the variations. And it should be kept in mind that individuals who self-identified as ethnically Hispanic, racially white, or other race were classified only as Hispanic. Individuals who identified as two or more races, such as white or black, were grouped under two or more races. We also have comparable information from the California School Dashboard on the right for students for the earliest year available. And the overall takeaway point that we wish to mention here is that in this figure, the new non-Hispanic white teachers in our sample are greatly overrepresenting, and the new Hispanic teachers are underrepresented in comparison to student enrollment in California public schools. And at any time, please feel free to take advantage of the Q&A or the chat functions of the webinar to raise questions or to ask any identifying information. Debbie and I would be more than happy to delve a little bit deeper. Christine, next slide, please. And then we're going to examine the initial licensure routes to employment for the teachers in our sample. As you can see that we focus on the, this initial permit earned type, waiver or intern, or through a preliminary route. And also we look at the preparation program sector, whether it's through the CSU route, through attending a University of California campus, or interning at the local education agency, or through a private or independent institution. There's this category which is coded as null in the data set, and this refers to the waiver or emergency permit credentialed out of state or through an alternate non-intern route of the teachers in our sample. And when focusing on the actual trends, the majority of the new teachers began teaching after completing a preliminary pathway and completed their training at a CSU or a private independent institution. Next slide, please. So despite what we just showed you, we found some important differences in some of the initial teacher variables when examining differences by race or ethnicities. And in most cases, these differences were found for our new teachers who identified as Hispanic or Black, especially when compared to those that are white only, not Hispanic. I would also like to know that in our preliminary mass modeling, we also found these groups to be the most likely to relate to new teacher retention or attrition. And finally, before moving on, I want to just point out that we decided not to show the Asian Pacific Islander results, not because of an omission, but because they typically mirror those that we found for the white teacher subgroup. If you do want to know the specifics of our AAPI teachers, though, please let Debbie or I know, and then we can answer those questions through the chat or Q&A. Next slide, please, Christine. Okay, so let's look at the percentages of these teachers in each licensure route. So you can think of this as breaking the sample down further to understand further variations. And the takeaway is that if you look at these percentages, what immediately strikes us is that the new Black teachers were the least likely to start teaching fully prepared with a preliminary credential, and they're the most likely to start with an intern credential or a waiver/emergency permit. And new Hispanic teachers were more likely than the new white teachers to have an intern credential, waiver, or emergency permit. And the difference is this is deserving of further examination, both in terms of looking at the sample more carefully, but what we hope is that these percentage differences prompt additional modeling, additional analysis that could help us understand further research questions in the teacher pathway. So Christine, next slide, please. So now we're going to revisit the program sectors or where the new teachers were trained, if at all. And in this case, the results are similar among our white and Hispanic teachers, who together make up about 4/5 of our sample, but it's different for our new Black teachers. And most predominant among these differences involve the null sector, which we mentioned. This is the waiver, emergency permit, credential out of state, or through an alternate non-intern route. And more specifically, nearly half of our new Black teachers were classified with this null sector code in terms of their preparation. In most cases, this was because of their having received a waiver or emergency permit. And while much less predominant, Black teachers were also moderately less likely than our new Hispanic or white teachers to receive their initial training from a CSU program. Now, some clarifications that deserve attention is that the proportion, we're breaking these things down into 3 bins, and the bin sizes visually, they appear to be the same on this picture, but the proportions of the new teacher actually vary quite large by race or ethnicity. New white teachers constituting about half the sample, Black teachers constituting only about 4% of the sample. Christine, next slide, please. So the next couple of slides, we're going to focus on the results above and below the median for some other variable of policy interest. For each analysis, this cut point can change, but in all cases, the median represents the midpoint with half of the numbers above, half of the numbers below, whichever variable that we examine. Next slide, please. So there's evidence in the literature that we know that schools with higher levels of poverty can be harder to staff. So we decided to look at the proportion of students who qualify for free reduced price lunch at the schools with our new teachers began their careers. So we took this school level variable, and created a cutoff. This will be the median 50%, 50 point of the distribution. And then we're going to compare the new Black or Hispanic or white teachers where they began their careers. And what we find here is that new Black teachers were 25% more likely, and new Hispanic teachers were 24% more likely, so give or take about the same, than a new white teacher to begin their career at a school with higher levels of poverty, and or in multiple schools during their first year that had higher portions of students who did qualify for free or reduced price lunch. Christine, next slide, please. And then again, the experienced teachers, can the schools retain them? And this is another variable based on the literature review we decided to examine. Some schools that had higher than the median probability of retention of experienced teachers, and some schools are below that. And then we're going to break the sample down in the same way as in the previous slide. And what we find here is also interesting in that the difference between our new Hispanic and white teachers, there was some difference, but these are not large differences. But if you compare these with the results from the Black teachers, we do notice some quite remarkable differences in the types of schools that they're in. And some of these schools struggle in retaining experienced teachers, and this, again, analysis like this prompt further modeling, further analysis so that we could understand all of the variations. Next slide, please. And breaking things down further in terms of student race, ethnicity context, we need to understand where the teachers began their careers, what their classrooms are like. We need to understand their experiences in the context, their lived experience of where they began their teaching career. And one of the current theories is that the students of color who receive better mentoring will have improved school pathways if they're taught by teachers who share their race or ethnicity. And because of this, we decided to examine the intersection between the student and teacher race or ethnicity. And the median for Black students in this analysis is 2.1%, and median for Hispanic students is 57.9%. in terms of this cutoff. As can be seen, at this large grain size, new Black Hispanic teachers were much more likely than other new teachers to directly teach students who match their own race or ethnicity. And 76% of new Black teachers had students population of 3.1 or greater, and 72% of new Hispanic teachers had Hispanic student populations of at least 57.9% or above. So this is another way to, again, break down the sample to understand the particular context and situations, which points at important other variables that we may have to examine in further analysis of this data set. And then with that, I'm going to hand it back to the other members of the team, Christine and Professor Tom Smith.
Other slides, we wanted to look at a longitudinal look at our sample.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So this is actually the beginning of some of the more advanced modeling that we have started to experiment, and we're only able to show some of this preliminary results here, knowing that more will come at a later stage. What we did here is we focused in this slide on 1-year retention. Now, admittedly, this is it's not necessarily the be-all end-all endpoint for modeling, but it is a very convenient endpoint. Whether short-term retention shows any differences across these race ethnicity categories. And then what we found is that these differences, while on the surface they do not differ a lot, there is a small but meaningful difference with new Black teachers less likely than those who identify as Hispanic or white to enter their second year of teaching. And you could see that this is, the percentages, every single data point in here, every single point increase represents, at a state level, represents many teachers who left the profession, and small differences may in fact be practically quite meaningful. So this next slide, if we may, please. Thank you. And then the second one, the second analysis that we did, we examined change in credential permit type by the end of year 3, which is a critical time period. And to clarify, this means that we tracked each of our new teachers for 3 years from the school year they entered the profession, and then not the year that they were credentialed. So in this case, differences can be found by initial licensure route, favoring those who started fully prepared. More specifically, less than 40% of new teachers who entered the classroom with a waiver or emergency permit went on to be fully prepared. That is, they received a preliminary or clear credential. Nearly 2/3 of those who began fully prepared with a preliminary credential went on to clear their credential. It is also notable that those who started on a waiver or emergency permit were twice as likely to leave teaching altogether than those who started with a preliminary credential. So these differences are rather large. Again, I'm sorry, Christine, for missing the part that I was supposed to do. But again, handing it back to you and handing it back to Professor Tom Smith.
Thank you, Lee. As noted earlier, we've been working on pulling these data together from different sources, mainly the CTC and the CDE, for quite some time. While we have many additional policy relevant issues that we plan to dig into, we thought it'd be important to share with you today a bit about what we're learning about the racial ethnic distribution of the teacher pipeline. As the TK student population has become, less white, as you saw, now only about 1/4 of students, there's been a real push to increase diversity of the teacher workforce. But change on the recruitment side has been slow. Most new teachers hired over the last decade, or at least those were included in our sample, have been white. Now, how do we do a better job of diversifying the teacher workforce? Obviously, recruiting more teachers of color. But while the state has made some progress, it's not enough for us to begin seeing teachers looking more like the students in the near future. But as retirements are forecast to increase, and we've been hearing a lot about upticks in COVID-related turnover, this is the time to redouble our efforts and recruit more teachers of color. But we also have to focus on retention. If teachers of color have higher likelihood of leaving the profession, particularly early in their careers, our efforts to diversify the teaching workforce will be diminished. So what have we seen today? Black and Hispanic teachers more likely to enter teaching unprepared, either through waivers or emergency credentials or as an intern. And so in addition to this concern about our students having unprepared teachers, this is a problem for at least two additional reasons. Teachers on waivers, emergency credentials, are not required to have a mentor or any other supports during their time teaching, even though they are the ones that are most likely to have the greatest need. And national data suggests that less prepared teachers are more likely to turn over. So we begin this vicious cycle that hinders our ability to address the teacher shortage in California. To give you a sense of the magnitude, data from CTC's April 2021 annual teacher supply report concluded that more than half of teaching credential CTC issues each year go to individuals who are not fully prepared to teach, more likely to teach in low-income schools. Now, the May revise of the governor's budget has included funding for new programs, particularly teacher residencies. It's also good to see that the Golden State Teacher Grant Program has been infused with new money so that more $20,000 grants in return for teaching in high-need fields and priority schools can be accommodated. But we're really going to need to monitor whether or not these new supports to bring teachers into the profession are both increasing the number of qualified teachers and helping us diversify the teaching pool. In the slides presented earlier, we see that Black and Hispanic teachers are more likely to start teaching in low-income schools. This is great for the kids in those schools, but we need to monitor closely, as research also suggests that initial placements of teachers in these schools is often associated with higher turnover of those beginning teachers. Next slide. On a positive side, Black and Hispanic teachers were also more likely to teach higher proportions of students who matched their own race or ethnicity. As Lee pointed out, research has been showing positive outcomes for students who have a racial match with their teachers, and so we are encouraged by this. But we're also seeing some data about school placement that is more concerning, particularly for new Black teachers. They're more likely to start in schools with higher turnover rates among their experienced teachers, which might be considered a less stable environment. This is also linked to higher turnover of new teachers in the literature. So, over the next few months, we'll be digging deeper into why new Black teachers have higher turnover rates than white, Hispanic, or Asian teachers, focusing on routes in which they start and the context of the schools in which they begin to teach, to see if we can better explain the differential turnover rates. Next slide. And while we're here today to share some of our findings, we're also looking for your ideas and feedback. You can drop those into the Q&A or send us an email. Tina will let you know in a minute how to connect with us. It's important for us to reiterate, though, our commitment to collaborating, both with state agencies, CDE and CTC, teacher education programs in California, both the Cal State and the private independents, nonprofit and advocacy organizations, and as Tina pointed out earlier, our work with Cradle to Career. We know that there are overlapping data interests, but we don't want to have multiple groups, repeating the same kinds of work. we really want to be transparent about what we're doing and as collaborative as possible. As Lee noted, we'll be adding additional data, more recent cohorts, so that we can monitor more changes in those entering teaching more recently, but also follow the teachers that we have in our current data set for more years in the labor force. This will allow us to assess whether or not they're moving schools in addition to turning over, moving from lower income to higher income schools, moving from lower performing to higher performing schools, or on the positive side, moving into leadership positions. We're also currently working with the CTC to identify ways that teacher education programs could report more data on policy relevant pathways. So we'd know which individuals are participating in residency programs, four-year programs, online programs, and be able to tie these to the kinds of outcomes which we've highlighted here. We'll also be putting more focus on beginning teachers in high needs areas, looking specifically at new mathematics teachers, science teachers, bilingual teachers, special ed teachers, to really get a sense of differences in where they go to teach, but also how long they stay in the profession. So now I'm going to turn everything back over to Tina to close us out.
Thank you, Tom, and everyone. Here is the team that has been working on what we showed you here today. If you would like to contact us, the CTERIN@education.ucsb.edu email will go to our mailbox and get distributed to each of us. You can also contact me directly at my email at ucsb. And we shall now, you can also go directly onto our website and be able to contact us from there. But let's move now to Q&A. We have been getting questions coming into the Q&A box that Debbie has been responding to in writing. And we can, if you haven't seen some of those, you should take a look. But also attendees, please enter some comments, questions now, and then maybe we can talk about those amongst our team for all of you to hear. And Debbie, while these are coming in, maybe would you like to point out some of the questions that you responded to that you feel others might be interested in?
Sure, I think one that's really good to start out with is from Edward. He says, it appears the amount and type of pedagogical education pre-service teachers receive is strongly associated with teacher attrition. Teachers with little or no pedagogical education seem to be more likely to leave the profession compared to teachers with comprehensive pedagogical education. What might this say about alternative programs that are not held in the same standards as accredited programs?
Tina, would you like me to say something on that?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so that's an issue that we're looking at closely with the California data, but basically most of what we know right now is based on kind of nationally representative studies of teacher retention. And your assumption, is correct. The teachers who both feel less prepared and who enter in through alternative pathways, those pathways in California would be similar to the intern or a waiver pathway, tend to turn over at significantly higher rates than their peers. Now, in the intern pathway in California, well, that first year is really hard because they're taking courses at the same time that they're teaching as teacher of record. They do eventually earn that preliminary credential if they complete all of the requirements and slide into the traditional teacher category. So it'll be really important for us to look closely about kind of turnover right at the end of that kind of intern period, and then how long they stay once they've earned their preliminary credential.
Thanks, Tom. And Mary Vixie Sandy, Executive Director of CTC, just responded to this as well. There's something I was going to mention too. Edward talks about alternative programs, and this has different meanings, but if it means intern programs, which is what we have in California, CTC does accredit all of our intern programs. So they're accredited preliminary programs, or traditional programs are accredited as well. They're just a different type of pathway, but both accredited. Debbie, what else are you seeing?
Well, we have a number of questions that are asking more about, for example, education levels, content areas, and also whether we're going to be looking at the intersection between segment and pathway.
And I think those are all things that we can do and will do. Yep. And I see there's a new question. Rigel Massaro has asked us, is CTERIN examining outlier schools or LEAs, for example, places that do a good job at retaining their new teachers of color, so we can identify best practices? Can I turn that over to you, Debbie, or Christine, or Lee?
I'll start, and then Lee, please add in. I mean, I think that these analyses will lend to new questions, new explorations, which we're eager to do. I think there are a lot of different avenues that we'll want to look at, and especially in thinking about how this information can feed into policy implications or future planning.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I mean, this is a great question, Rigel. This is reminding me of the great brief that Learning Policy Institute put out about the outlier districts and what we can learn about what is happening in those districts where they are retaining new teachers of color. And I think that we should intersect with that research and see what sort of patterns we are finding across the entire state, and understand, and that kind of research that came before can help us tease out what is happening. So good questions, and I hope you will continue to help us with that. Jack, I don't know, is Jackie or Jassy, congratulations on this work. Will be interesting to see how these data compare to results from the 2017-18 National Teacher Survey from NCES. Yes, their preliminary findings are similar to what we have seen at AACTE from national data. Great. Yes, I think, again, the more we can connect with data outside of California, the more we can understand about our work. Let's see, so Paul Tuss is asking us, is it possible to identify teachers prepared via residency program models and explore their outcomes? And in future, we're hoping to do that. Right now, the data that we have for individuals only identifies whether they have attended a traditional program where they earn a preliminary credential, which currently would hold people in residency programs, because they would also earn a permit, a preliminary permit at the end of that. But we are engaging in a study that has been funded by the Gates Foundation that is going to help us tease out the residency and other pathways. We're going to pilot that, and we've just begun that now. Tom or Christine or anybody want to say more about that?
No, I think you did a good job, unless there are follow-up questions.
Okay. And then Jennifer has a long question here, so I'm going to read this and see. Is there an investigation of choice, a prep program versus emergency waiver intern, related to SES of teacher candidates? I have to wonder if the need for a salary sooner rather than later versus having to pay for a preparation program in addition to not receiving a salary influences the decision to attend prep programs. And unfortunately, in reality, SES is often correlated with ethnic racial groups and the need to be financially self-supporting versus being able to afford more school tuition. Is there a way to address the probability of this economic consideration within our prep programs? This is a key key issue, Jennifer, and thank you for bringing this up. And we do talk about it in our policy brief. It is one of the realities of why we probably have so many candidates who are entering programs, the emergency waiver route or the intern route, because they're financially supported in ways that they aren't in other routes. Linda Darling Hammond has said for a long time that in the United States, we disincentivize high quality, intense teacher preparation. And that is because the programs where we're seeing the most retention are the programs where candidates are engaged full-time. They don't have time to work outside of it and earn money. They need to pay tuition. They need to pay for their own living expenses. And for a long time, this has affected the trends that we are seeing today. Tom mentioned some of the really important things that have come out of the May revise to support this effort. But you are absolutely correct in your observations. Other comments that you have? Tom?
I'll just add that unfortunately, the way that our data are put together, we wouldn't be able to add, to that notion that Tina has. Our information is on teachers from the day, that they're credentialed, by the CTC, and their background information other than basic demographics are not included in those files.
We just want to thank you for joining us today. We want to remind you again that we will be sending you all the document, the brief, with all of the data tables and other comments around this work. And we look forward to seeing you again in future. We will let you know when our next briefing will be. Please invite others who might be interested. And here is our website that you can go to see more of our resources on all of the aims that we have done. So thank you again. Thanks everybody here, other panelists, for doing that. Thank you, Vice President Gulat, for being with us the whole hour too. Thank you.